We're only a few weeks into 2026, and Everest is already in chaos. Inexperienced climbers are entering the death zone with little understanding of what they're doing. Some of them have never even climbed the most basic of peaks. Today, we're breaking down the first Everest incidents of the year and what they reveal about how inexperienced climbers are making the mountain more dangerous than ever. It was January 2nd, 2026, and the Himalayan winter had settled over the Khumbu Valley with brutal efficiency. Everest's summit pyramid rose 29,032 feet above sea level, its upper reaches obscured by a constant plume of wind-driven snow. The temperature at base camp hovered at minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air was so dry that every breath felt like inhaling glass. Only 3 winter teams were operating on the mountain, privately funded expeditions, attempting what most climbers considered suicidal. The sky above the Khumbu was a hard, metallic blue, the kind of color that only appears when the air is too thin to hold warmth or moisture. Marcus Holloway stood among the scattered tents, watching the Khumbu icefall emerge from pre-dawn darkness. His breath crystallized instantly in the thin air at 17,600 feet. Around him, experienced climbers moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment with unconscious precision. Marcus checked his gear with theatrical deliberateness, aware that his movements lacked their fluid confidence. Marcus was 41, a hedge fund manager from Greenwich, Connecticut, who had spent 2 decades building wealth by identifying market inefficiencies. He applied the same framework to Everest: identify the objective, allocate resources, execute the plan. To Marcus, Everest was not a craft to be learned over years. It was a milestone that could be purchased outright. He had paid $147,000 for a bespoke winter expedition. The company provided everything: Sherpa support, supplemental oxygen, satellite communication, and emergency protocols. In Marcus's mind, those services pointed toward a single expected outcome: a successful summit attempt delivered as part of the package. What they couldn't provide, however, was experience and technical skills. Those were the most important requirements, yet couldn't be purchased, no matter how much he paid. His climbing resume: Kilimanjaro via the Morang route and Aconcagua, both walk-up peaks requiring minimal technical skills. He'd reached 22,841 feet on Aconcagua without using crampons on steep ice or managing complex rope systems. Marcus had concluded that altitude was manageable with proper fitness, which he possessed in abundance. 8 months of training, stadium stairs with a weighted vest, altitude simulation chambers, and a personal trainer specializing in endurance athletes. His resting heart rate was 48. He could run a sub-3-hour marathon. By every metric he understood, he was prepared. What Marcus didn't understand was that fitness and mountaineering skills were different domains. He had never used crampons on sustained, steep terrain, never clipped into a fixed rope while his body weight swung over a crevasse, never managed supplemental oxygen in sub-zero temperatures while hypoxic. These weren't knowledge gaps he could study away. They were motor skills requiring repetition until automatic. His guiding company required medical clearance and a liability waiver. They required proof of previous high-altitude experience, which Marcus provided through his Aconcagua summit certificate. What they didn't verify was technical competence on glaciated terrain. On paper, Marcus met the minimum requirements, but in reality, the requirements were calibrated to paperwork and not actual proficiency. His Sherpa guide, Pemba Nuru, had noticed problems during the trek to base camp. Marcus moved awkwardly with his pack, struggled with basic knots, and clipped his ascender backward twice before correction. When Pemba suggested additional training before attempting the icefall, Marcus responded that his payment included a summit attempt, not climbing school. The outcome, in his mind, was already purchased. The team departed at 4:30 a.m., headlamps cutting corridors through darkness. The winter icefall route was provisional: fewer ladders, minimal anchors, no daily maintenance. The glacier groaned beneath them as it flowed downhill. Aluminum ladders bridged the widest gaps, secured by ropes frozen stiff as steel cables. The temperature had dropped to minus 32 degrees. Marcus moved slowly, gripping the safety line with both hands and watching his feet. His crampon technique was inefficient. He lifted his feet too high with each step, wasting energy. Behind him, a single climber from another winter team waited at the first ladder crossing. The ladder angled at 30 degrees, spanning a crevasse, dropping into blue darkness. Pemba crossed first, crampons ringing against aluminum in quick rhythm. He gestured for Marcus to follow. Marcus stepped onto the ladder with full weight on his right foot. The aluminum flexed dramatically. Marcus jerked backward, grabbing the rope, breathing suddenly rapid. Pemba demonstrated again, crampons flat, weight distributed, continuous movement. Marcus nodded, waited, and tried again. He made it 3 rungs before stopping, gripping the rope so tightly his gloves creaked. The crossing took 4 minutes and 20 seconds. By the time Marcus reached the far side, 2 other climbers were waiting, conserving energy in the brutal cold. This was the first of multiple crossings, and they weren't 30 minutes into the climb. Already, Marcus wasn't just risking himself. He was consuming the narrow window of survivable movement. The pattern repeated at each obstacle. Marcus approached every technical move with halting hesitation. His oxygen mask kept slipping because he couldn't adjust it with gloves on. His ascender kept jamming because he applied force at the wrong angle. Pemba found himself managing Marcus's equipment entirely, transforming from guide to full-time assistant. By Camp 1 at 19,900 feet, the weather window was tightening. Pemba radioed base camp with a progress update, voice professionally neutral. Marcus felt irritation. He was moving as fast as he could. The mountain was simply harder than training suggested. The climb toward Camp 2 should have been straightforward, a gradual ascent on low-angle terrain, but Marcus's oxygen consumption was far above predicted rates. This wasn't normal climbing oxygen. It was emergency treatment oxygen, clipped on early because things were already going wrong. He was breathing heavily despite the flow, movements sluggish. At 21,200 feet, Pemba noticed Marcus swaying slightly, suggesting early altitude sickness. When asked how he felt, Marcus insisted he was fine, just tired. At 21,800 feet, Marcus stopped moving entirely. He bent over his trekking poles, gasping despite oxygen showing 2 liters per minute. His face had gone pale with a grayish tint. Marcus complained of dizziness and nausea. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Pemba recognized acute mountain sickness, potentially progressing toward pulmonary edema. The correct response was immediate descent. Marcus refused. He had paid $147,000. That payment didn't just cover logistics. It bought him access to the mountain itself. He had trained for 8 months. Turning back meant admitting failure, and Marcus's identity was built on succeeding where others couldn't. The argument lasted over an hour. Pemba explained that altitude sickness could be fatal, that the mountain would be here next year. Marcus responded that he felt fine and just needed rest. His breathing remained rapid and shallow, and hyperventilation worsened his symptoms. Marcus insisted on continuing upward for another 45 minutes, his condition deteriorating visibly, before Pemba finally made the decision for him and physically blocked his path, forcing him to descend. Marcus resisted, then complied when his legs began trembling uncontrollably. The descent was chaotic. Marcus stumbled repeatedly, requiring Pemba's constant steadying. His coordination deteriorated dramatically, responses to questions becoming delayed and confused. By 20,400 feet, Marcus's lips showed a bluish tint. At 19,900 feet, he collapsed. Pemba radioed for evacuation. Marcus was placed on a rescue sled, and with assistance from 3 other Sherpas summoned from base camp, was pulled and carried down through the icefall over the next 6 hours. The descent was agonizing. Marcus remained semi-conscious, mumbling about needing to reach the summit, while his lungs filled with fluid. His breathing became increasingly wet and labored, each breath producing a gurgling sound that the Sherpas recognized as advanced pulmonary edema, progressing at catastrophic speed. They reached base camp at 17,600 feet by early evening. The weather had deteriorated. Winds picked up, visibility dropped, and the temperature plunged to minus 38 degrees. Marcus was placed in the expedition's medical tent with supplemental oxygen, but the damage was too extensive. His oxygen saturation remained critically low despite maximum intervention. His lungs had sustained too much damage from the extended exposure at altitude, combined with his refusal to descend when symptoms first appeared. The weather didn't clear until the following morning. At first light, an AS-350B3 helicopter made 3 approaches to base camp before managing a brief touchdown. Marcus was loaded aboard, barely conscious, his breathing wet and desperate. The helicopter lifted off immediately, the pilot fighting for altitude in air so thin the machine operated at the absolute edge of its performance envelope. The flight staged through Lukla at 9,383 feet, where Marcus was transferred to a larger helicopter for the final leg to Kathmandu. He arrived at Kathmandu Medical College teaching hospital around mid-morning. Medical staff immediately placed him in a hyperbaric chamber while administering high-flow oxygen and medications, but his condition wouldn't stabilize despite aggressive treatment. Marcus Holloway died that evening from acute pulmonary edema and respiratory failure. His last words were about needing to finish the climb, about having paid for a summit attempt. The incident report noted classic altitude illness symptoms that required immediate descent. His extended refusal to turn back, combined with a lack of technical skills, created a medical emergency that endangered his guide and consumed rescue resources. No penalties were issued. Winter Expeditions accepted that clients bore ultimate responsibility for their own limitations. It was January 5th, 2026, and the weather system that had complicated Marcus Holloway's rescue 3 days earlier had finally stabilized over the Khumbu Valley. The temperatures remained brutal, minus 32 degrees Fahrenheit at base camp, but the winds had moderated slightly, and a narrow window had opened for movement on the upper mountain. At Everest Base Camp, at 17,600 feet, one of the small winter expedition teams was preparing to take advantage of conditions that had improved from chaotic to merely severe. Among the climbers was Jessica Palmer, 26, a personal trainer from Austin, Texas, whose climbing experience consisted of indoor gym sessions, a weekend in Joshua Tree National Park, and a guided climb of Mount Rainier, where she'd reached 14,411 feet. She had never climbed above 15,000 feet in technical alpine terrain, never used an ice axe on sustained steep ice, never spent multiple nights above 20,000 feet. What she had done was watch approximately 400 hours of Everest footage on YouTube. She believed intellectual understanding could substitute for physical practice. Her expedition company accepted her application based on her Rainier Summit Certificate, a fitness assessment, and a $118,000 payment. When questioned about limited alpine experience, Jessica provided gym instructor references and emphasized exceptional conditioning. She could deadlift twice her body weight, run a 4-hour marathon, and complete 100 pull-ups without stopping. On paper, she looked capable enough. The company's operations manager later admitted he had concerns, but had been overruled by ownership who needed to fill their rare winter expedition slots. Problems began at base camp. Jessica struggled to fit crampons to her boots, a task that should have been automatic after her Rainier training. Her Sherpa guide, Dawa Tenzing, demonstrated 3 times. Jessica nodded confidently, attempted it herself, and produced a result that would fail within 10 steps before Dawa finally fitted them himself. Her ice axe technique was theatrical rather than functional. She copied from videos without understanding biomechanics. She swung the axe with her entire upper body, wasting energy and placing the pick at ineffective angles. When corrected, she repeated terminology she'd learned online: self-arrest, French technique, front pointing, but the words didn't translate to muscle memory. The icefall exposed the gap within the first hour. The winter route was sparsely equipped: fewer ladders, longer stretches of fixed rope, no margin for inefficiency. The first ladder crossing required clipping a carabiner from one rope section to another while balanced on aluminum over a crevasse. Simple for experienced climbers. Unclip, reach, clip, continue. 3 seconds. Jessica fumbled the gate, couldn't operate it with gloves, and nearly dropped it into the void. Dawa completed the clip for her. This happened at every transition. What should have taken seconds consumed minutes. By the 3rd crossing, the only other climber in the icefall had stopped moving, waiting for Jessica to clear the obstacle. A Polish guide radioed politely, asking if Jessica's team could allow him to pass. The request wasn't angry, but it was a reminder that even in winter's isolation, one climber could bottleneck the entire route. At Camp 1, Jessica's hands showed early frostbite, fingertips waxy and pale. Sensation dulled. She had adjusted the equipment with bare hands despite warnings, believing she could manage exposure for just a few seconds. Those seconds, repeated too many times, damaged tissue before pain registered. When confronted, Jessica insisted she knew her limits. The statement revealed a fundamental misunderstanding. Frostbite didn't ask permission. By Camp 2, at 21,300 feet, Jessica developed a persistent cough from breathing cold air through her mouth instead of sealing her oxygen mask properly. By the 3rd night at Camp 2, she was coughing hard enough that her ribs ached with each breath, making breathing at altitude more difficult and painful. By Camp 3 at 24,500 feet, Jessica moved in a daze. Altitude pushed her into hypoxic impairment, where she could follow instructions but showed almost no independent judgment. Her guides made every decision, managed every piece of equipment. The few other climbers on the mountain questioned why she was still moving upward. The summit push began at midnight on January 8th from Camp 4. Jessica moved with jerky, uncertain motions. Her breathing was labored despite supplemental oxygen. Coordination noticeably deteriorated. She required assistance with clipping and unclipping and couldn't manage oxygen changes herself. At 26,800 feet, where fixed ropes traverse a steep rock section, the gaps became fatal. The traverse required weighting the rope while maintaining 3 points of contact. Basic movement experienced climbers performed automatically. Jessica approached and hesitated. The exposure was severe, a 1,000-foot drop visible in gray morning light. She reached for a handhold, weighted the rope, and retreated. She tried again with the same result. Dawa offered to clip her into a short rope system for direct assistance. Jessica refused. She had posted publicly about summiting independently and resisted anything that made her feel carried. Pride outweighed judgment. On her 4th attempt, she weighted the rope while reaching for a handhold slightly beyond her reach. Her carabiner was properly clipped to the fixed line, but in her hypoxic state, she'd forgotten to close the gate. When she shifted her weight, the carabiner popped open and the rope slipped free. Jessica fell approximately 25 feet before her harness arrested against a lower anchor. The arrest was violent. She slammed into the rock face, sustaining severe trauma, broken ribs, internal injuries, and a head wound that immediately began bleeding. She hung suspended at 45 degrees, harness twisted, barely conscious. Blood from the forehead gash froze almost immediately. When she tried to speak, the words came out slurred and confused. Dawa descended immediately, rappelling with practiced speed. He found Jessica fading in and out of consciousness, pupils dilated, breathing shallow and rapid. He radioed for evacuation. Knowing the answer, helicopter rescue from this position was impossible in winter conditions. The nearest helicopter sat grounded in Kathmandu, unable to fly in the current weather. Even if conditions improved, the altitude and exposure made extraction from this location impossible. For more detailed mountain disaster breakdowns, go ahead and subscribe and leave a like. Your support keeps this channel going. Now let's get back to the mountain. Over the next 2 hours, Dawa worked alone to secure Jessica and administer oxygen. The temperature never rose above minus 25 degrees. Jessica's body lost heat rapidly through injured tissue and immobility. Her speech became increasingly incoherent, but hypothermia progressed faster than he could counter it. Another climber from a different expedition appeared on the route above, stopped briefly to assess the situation, then continued downward. There was nothing he could do, and stopping meant risking his own survival. The sun climbed higher, but provided no warmth at this altitude. Only harsh light that made the impossibility of her situation more visible. By mid-morning, Jessica had stopped responding entirely. Her core temperature had dropped beyond recovery, and the combination of trauma, blood loss, and extreme cold progressed beyond what any intervention could address. Jessica Palmer died around late morning on January 8th, 2026, from traumatic injuries compounded by hypothermia. Her body remained suspended for 5 days before weather conditions allowed a recovery team to reach her position. 6 Sherpas spent hours rigging a lowering system. Once the jet stream winds finally moderated, a technical operation made more difficult by the steep terrain and Jessica's frozen position. The review concluded her death resulted from failing to close her carabiner gate, an error that proper training would have prevented automatically. Her research gave her vocabulary, not competence. The mountain didn't care which one she had. It was January 17, 2026, and Everest's deadly January was approaching its conclusion with a final demonstration of how inexperience becomes lethal when systems fail. The weather over the Khumbu had stabilized into a pattern that veteran winter climbers recognized as a genuine window, cold but manageable, with winds dropping to levels that allowed movement on the upper mountain. At Camp 4 on the South Col, at 26,000 feet, one climber was preparing for a summit attempt that would end in his death less than 24 hours later. Brandon Mills had climbed Island Peak, 20,305 feet, and La Bouche East, 20,075 feet, both popular trekking peaks in the Khumbu that required basic crampon skills but minimal technical expertise. He was 24, a software developer from Seattle, who believed technology could optimize any challenge. His worldview was pure Silicon Valley. every problem solvable through data, every skill reducible to simulation. His preparation combined his Nepal trekking peak experience with extensive online courses, altitude simulation, and virtual reality scenarios that recreated Everest in detail. His training included online coaching, treadmill training at simulated altitude, and more than 200 hours in VR navigating Everest routes. He arrived for his Everest attempt with elite fitness metrics, VO2 max in the 95th percentile, resting heart rate 42, and minimal experience on complex high-altitude terrain. His expedition company hesitated, but was impressed by his documentation and his successful summits of Island Peak and La Bouche East. Brandon produced training logs, risk assessments, and performance analytics demonstrating intellectual mastery. When questioned about his limited technical background on peaks above 20,000 feet, he argued that simulation could supplement apprenticeship. After reviewing his trekking peak certificates and fitness data, the company accepted his $134,000 payment and assigned an experienced Sherpa guide. Early progress went smoothly. Brandon followed instructions precisely. His conditioning carried him through the lower camps. By January 16th, he reached Camp 4 without incident. His guides were cautiously optimistic. The summit push began late on January 16th. Brandon moved steadily through the night. Oxygen consumption remained within expected limits. Communication was clear. Dawn broke as he approached the upper ridge. Near 28,800 feet, visibility deteriorated in blowing spindrift and flat light. Brandon encountered a slow-moving climber ahead on the fixed line, creating a bottleneck. Rather than wait in the wind, Brandon grew impatient. He had studied the route extensively in VR simulations and believed he could navigate around the obstacle and rejoin the fixed line above. He called to his guide, Nima Dorje, who was managing rope transitions behind him. Nima radioed back, telling him to stay clipped and wait. Brandon hesitated. His confidence was built on optimization, not patience. He unclipped and began traversing right, believing the terrain would reconnect with the route. Within minutes, his GPS failed. Extreme cold drained the battery far faster than specifications predicted. The screen went dark. Landmarks he'd memorized from VR didn't align with reality. Depth, distance, and slope were distorted in ways his simulations had never captured. Brandon tried to retrace his steps but couldn't find the fixed line. The snow conditions made every direction look identical, endless. White interrupted by rock outcrops that all appeared the same in the flat light. Radio calls to Nima went unanswered initially. The wind and terrain were blocking transmission. When contact was finally re-established, Brandon couldn't accurately describe his position. Everything looked the same. Wind swallowed sound. His VR training scenarios hadn't prepared him for navigation failure at extreme altitude without electronics, for the panic that set in when every decision felt wrong and no landmarks made sense. He wandered for hours, burning oxygen and energy, becoming progressively hypothermic and hypoxic. Nima attempted to locate him, moving off route while trying to follow his garbled radio descriptions. But the vast terrain and poor visibility made the search nearly impossible. Boot prints later showed Brandon's erratic movement, long traverses in one direction, then sudden reversals as he realized he was heading away from the summit rather than toward it, then tightening circles as confusion deepened and his ability to maintain direction failed completely. By late afternoon, his oxygen was exhausted. His movements became sluggish, then stopped entirely as his body began shutting down. He likely didn't understand he was dying. The hypoxia would have created euphoria, a sense that everything was fine, even as his systems failed. Search teams located his position the following morning via his emergency beacon. Brandon Mills was found at 28,700 feet, partially buried in snow, less than 1,000 feet from the standard route. He died from exposure and hypoxia, wandering in circles while salvation remained just beyond reach. Recovery was postponed until weather and resource availability aligned several days later. The operation required 6 Sherpas working in difficult terrain, 3 deaths in 15 days, 3 inexperienced climbers. Each mistake slowed routes, triggered dangerous rescues, and pushed risk onto guides and other climbers, steadily ruining Everest by turning personal ambition into a shared hazard. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.